For the first time since her trauma, Sarah felt seen, not as a victim, but as a whole person. And in Daniel, she found something she thought was lost forever: the possibility of love. Sarah had never imagined herself getting married, but with Daniel, everything felt different. Their relationship grew naturally, without pressure or fear. He was patient, kind, and seemed to understand her in ways no one else ever had. His gentle nature and unwavering support slowly helped her believe in love again. His words about faith, healing, and forgiveness resonated deeply, gradually stitching together the broken pieces of her past. When Daniel proposed during a quiet picnic at their favorite park, Sarah felt overwhelmed with joy. For the first time in years, happiness didn't feel fragile. It felt real. Their wedding was simple yet beautiful, held in the same church where they had first met. Friends and family gathered, smiling as Sarah walked down the aisle in a delicate lace dress, her hands trembling slightly around her bouquet. At the altar, Daniel stood waiting, his calm presence steadying her nerves. As they exchanged vows, Sarah felt a wave of peace wash over her. Maybe, just maybe, the past no longer had power over her future. That evening, after the reception, they checked into a cozy bed and breakfast on the edge of town for their wedding night. Sarah was filled with nervous excitement, pushing aside any lingering doubts, ready to embrace her new life. But then, as Daniel undressed, her gaze landed on something that made her blood run cold: a birthmark on his wrist. A twisted crescent moon. Her heart stopped. For a moment, the world stood still. Confusion, fear, and disbelief crashed over her as the perfect life she thought she had built shattered in an instant. Hands trembling, Sarah locked herself in the bathroom, her pulse hammering in her ears. She pressed her back against the cold tile, gasping for air. The birthmark, that unmistakable crescent shape, flashed through her mind like a cruel joke. She squeezed her eyes shut, hoping it was a coincidence, a trick of her imagination. But deep down, a sickening certainty took hold. Memories she had fought to bury came rushing back with brutal clarity: the masked man, the alley, the terror, the helplessness. The same mark. The same man. How could it be him? The man who had helped her heal, the man she had trusted with her heart, now seemed to be the monster who had broken her all those years ago. Panic surged through her veins. She couldn't stay. Not another second. Her mind scrambled for explanations. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe trauma was playing tricks on her. But the dread in her gut refused to be ignored. Steeling herself, she unlocked the bathroom door. Daniel was in the other room, unaware of the storm raging inside her. Moving quickly, she grabbed her purse and slipped out the door, her wedding dress catching on the frame as if trying to hold her back. Outside, the night air was sharp against her flushed skin. She walked aimlessly at first, blinded by tears, until instinct took over. The police station wasn't far. She needed answers. More than that, she needed someone to believe her. Without hesitation, she headed there, her wedding night spiraling into a nightmare she never saw coming. Detective Mark Harris had seen his share of difficult cases over the years. But when Sarah walked into the station, still in her wedding dress, eyes wide with panic and fear, he knew this was something different. Her hand shook as she clutched her purse. Her veil was torn, her makeup streaked with tears. Without hesitation, Harris led her into his office, away from the curious eyes of other officers. At first, Sarah struggled to speak. Her words came out in broken fragments, but Harris waited patiently. He had learned that sometimes silence was the best way to help a victim open up. Eventually, through deep breaths and trembling hands, she told him everything. Her assault in college, the masked man with the twisted crescent birthmark, and the moment of horror when she saw that same mark on her husband's wrist. Harris listened intently, piecing together the threads of her story. It was shocking, almost unbelievable. But there was a conviction in Sarah's voice that he couldn't ignore. The weight of Sarah's discovery hung between them, like an unspoken truth, suffocating in its enormity. Detective Harris knew this wasn't something that could be handled lightly, especially with Caleb Foster standing in the community. He wasn't just a suspect. He was the town's beloved preacher, a man people trusted with their deepest fears and sins. Accusing him of such a monstrous crime without absolute proof would shatter the town's faith. But Sarah's safety came first. Harris promised to investigate quietly, ensuring Caleb remained unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. He arranged for Sarah to stay in a secure location, far from the man she had once called her husband. As she sat in his office, exhausted and shaken, he saw the toll this revelation had taken on her. She had lost everything in one night: the man she loved, the future she had believed in, and the fragile sense of security she had fought so hard to rebuild. But there was no time to dwell on the weight of it all. If Caleb had truly hidden behind the mask of righteousness for years, Harris needed to uncover the full extent of his crimes before the preacher had a chance to cover his tracks. The deeper Harris dug, the more disturbing the picture became. On the surface, Caleb's past seemed unblemished: no criminal record, glowing recommendations from previous churches, a pristine image that inspired unwavering devotion. But Harris knew that monsters often hid in plain sight. He began searching through cold case files from the towns where Caleb had previously lived, looking for anything that mirrored Sarah's experience. What he found sent a chill through him. Scattered across different towns, spanning years, were reports of young women attacked in eerily similar ways. Late at night, a masked assailant. No leads. No trace. Every case had eventually gone cold. But one detail stood out. One of the victims had glimpsed a faint, crescent-shaped birthmark on her attacker's wrist. Just like Sarah had. The realization hit Harris like a gut punch. This wasn't an isolated incident. Caleb Foster hadn't just hurt Sarah. He had been doing this for years, moving from town to town, leaving victims in his wake while maintaining his saintly facade. With every new piece of evidence, Harris felt the noose tightening around Caleb's carefully constructed life. The preacher wasn't just a predator, he was a calculating one, using his position of power to shield himself from suspicion. But no more. Harris needed to act. Meanwhile, Sarah remained in hiding, but fear wasn't the only emotion consuming her. Beneath the terror, something else burned: anger. She had spent years fighting to heal, believing she had moved past the worst. And yet, the very man who had helped her put the pieces of her life back together had been the one who shattered them in the first place. The betrayal was unbearable. She couldn't sit in the shadows any longer. She needed answers. Ignoring Harris's warning to stay hidden, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. One evening, she returned to the house she had once shared with Caleb. The place that had once felt safe now loomed like a haunted ruin, filled with ghosts of a love that had never been real. Inside, Caleb sat in the living room, absorbed in a book, completely unaware of the reckoning about to unfold. Sarah swallowed hard, forcing herself to stay calm. She didn't confront him outright. Instead, she started talking about the past, the attack she had endured in college, the masked man, and the mark she had never forgotten. She watched him closely, searching for a reaction. For a moment, Caleb didn't flinch. But then, just for a fraction of a second, his grip on the book tightened. His jaw clenched. His eyes darkened, as if the shadows of his secrets had stirred beneath the surface. That flicker of recognition was all Sarah needed. She turned and walked out without another word. Now she knew. And so did Harris. The detective wasted no time. The risk of Caleb realizing they were onto him was too great. Harris secured a warrant and assembled a small team. This had to be done quietly, without giving Caleb a chance to manipulate the community or slip away. At dawn, they arrived at the preacher's house. Caleb answered the door with his usual warm, calm expression. But the moment he saw the officers behind Harris, something in his demeanor shifted. He wasn't surprised. He had always been good at masking his emotions. But there was a brief flicker of unease, a tightening in his posture that betrayed him. Harris met his gaze. "Caleb Foster, you're under arrest for sexual assault and suspicion of multiple related crimes." For the first time, Caleb's mask cracked. It was barely noticeable, just a small tension in his jaw, a slight narrowing of his eyes. But Harris saw it. He didn't protest, didn't struggle. He simply stared, his expression cold, as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. But Harris wasn't done. He led the search of the house himself, pushing through every dark corner Caleb had hidden behind for years. And then, in the basement, they found it. A locked storage room. Inside, a collection of items, small, insignificant on their own, but horrifying in context. Jewelry. Scarves. Torn pieces of clothing. Keepsakes from his victims. The trophies of a predator. It was undeniable proof. When the news of Caleb's arrest spread, the town reeled in shock. People refused to believe it at first. How could the man who had guided them in faith, who had offered comfort and counsel, be capable of such evil? But the evidence was overwhelming. The truth could no longer be ignored. And as Caleb Foster was taken away in handcuffs, Sarah stood outside the police station watching. For the first time in years, the nightmare was over. But the scars it left behind would never truly fade. Sarah sat in the dim glow of her living room, her eyes locked onto the television screen as the news unfolded. Tears streamed down her face, her emotions caught in a whirlwind of relief and heartbreak. Caleb Foster, her husband, the man she had trusted, was in handcuffs, his mask finally ripped away for the world to see. She should have felt triumphant. Instead, a hollow ache settled in her chest. The man she had loved had never truly existed. He had only been a carefully crafted illusion, a deception so complete that even she had believed it. The trial drew nationwide attention. On the day it began, the courthouse was packed. Journalists lined the back rows, cameras clicking as they captured every moment. Townspeople whispered in disbelief, some still clinging to denial, others grappling with the monstrous reality. And then there were the victims, women who had carried their silence for years, now sitting in quiet solidarity, waiting for justice. Sarah sat near the front, her fingers tightly clasped in her lap, her heart pounding against her ribs. She had spent weeks bracing for this moment, knowing she would have to lay bare the darkest chapter of her life before strangers, knowing Caleb would be watching. Speaking the truth meant reopening wounds she had spent years trying to close. But she also knew she had to do this. She had to reclaim her voice. When she took the stand, a heavy silence settled over the courtroom. Her voice trembled as she spoke of that night in college, the fear, the paralysis, the masked figure who had stolen her sense of safety. She described the detail she had never forgotten, the crescent-shaped birthmark on her attacker's wrist. And then she spoke of Cale, of the moment she had realized the truth, of the horror that had unraveled her life. Each word felt like a blade cutting through her, but she refused to falter. She only looked at Caleb once. He sat motionless, his expression devoid of remorse, as if none of it mattered. As if her pain, the suffering of all the women before her, was nothing more than an inconvenience. But the truth could no longer be ignored. The prosecution laid everything bare, testimonies from other victims, the chilling evidence recovered from Caleb's home, the trophies he had kept, the pattern of his crimes, spanning years and towns. The gentle, compassionate preacher was gone. In his place stood a predator exposed. The jury deliberated for only a short time. When the verdict was read, Sarah barely breathed. Guilty. on multiple counts of sexual assault. Caleb Foster was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Even as the courtroom erupted, some in shock, others in quiet relief, Sarah felt only a strange emptiness. The man who had shattered so many lives was finally behind bars. Justice had been served. And yet, no verdict could erase the past. The scars he had left behind would never truly fade. As she stepped out of the courthouse, the crisp air filled her lungs, lighter than it had in years. The weight she had carried for so long had begun to lift. She had survived. Healing would not come overnight. There would be days when the past clawed its way back, when the memories threatened to consume her. But today, she had taken the first step. She had faced the truth, and she refused to let it define her future. In the end, the truth had shattered the illusion that Caleb Foster had so carefully built. The man once revered as a guiding force in the community was unmasked as a predator who had preyed on trust and faith. His conviction brought justice, but justice alone could not erase the pain of his victims. For Sarah, the journey was far from over. The scars of her past would remain, reminders of both the darkness she had endured and the strength she had found to fight back. But she was no longer the broken woman who had once lived in fear. She had faced the monster in her life, and she had won. As the town struggled to reconcile the truth, Sarah walked forward, no longer bound by the weight of silence. She had reclaimed her voice, her story, and her future. And though healing would take time, one thing was certain: she was free.
Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more